put the seat back on there, got it all, took the rubber band off, took the plastic off, the belt in, put the buckle in, and inside of the buckle is a business card. The business card says, Candlelight Inn, Biloxi, Mississippi. And on the back is a map, embossed on the card, on how to get to the Candlelight Inn. And when these things happen, you don't do that. You don't go booga booga booga. How did this? I'm going to Biloxi. You don't do that. It was just a flashing thought, and I put it in my pocket, and drove down to Biloxi. I picked up a hitchhiker on the way down there, a black man who had never talked to a white person before, face to face. First time in this deep south. And I couldn't get him to look at my face when I was talking to him, and I went 40 miles out of my way to take him to his home. He lived in a shack. It was an amazing experience. And drove back, got on the road, and got to Biloxi. It was the 30th of August. It was Friday, and it was about 10 minutes to 5. And I pulled into a sign that said, "Welcome to Biloxi, Mississippi." You know, the first. And I pulled over. There was a Standard gas station there. I can see this as if it happened yesterday. This was 1974, so like close to 40 years ago. And there was a phone book hanging on a chain down the at this payphone, and it was 10 cents to make a phone call. So you took a dime and put it in, ding, 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 ding. You remember those? And I looked up cemeteries in Biloxi. That's the only clue I had. There's 3 listings for cemeteries in Biloxi in 1974. So the first one, there was no answer. The second one was busy. And the third one was a much smaller listing. It was just a very narrow kind of listing, just very faded and small. And I called and rang, and finally this old man answered the phone, old Southern gentleman. And I said, "I'm calling to find out if a Melvin Lyle Dyer, who died in 1964, his body, all I know is his body was shipped to Biloxi, and I'm just wanting to find out if I could go to see my father's grave. I just would like to go to his grave." I had an idea of what I was going to do on his grave. I did. And that was exactly my intention at that time. So the man, he said, I'll be back, and it took a long time. They do things in Mississippi a little slower than they do in other places. And they didn't really have files. They just had all these death certificates were just in a Coca-Cola box, and it was all faded away, and it had been stormed, or water had flooded it, and so on. It was just, and it was, 10 years of smelly, musty kind of thing. And he said, "Young man," he said, "you're in luck." He said, "Yes." He said, your father is buried here." I said, "Oh, that's wonderful." I said, "I'd really like to come to his grave. I just feel like this is a mission that I've been sent on." This was 1974. I wrote about this, and I can see clearly. That was a very significant year. Many, many things happened in that year, the year that I was 34, just before I wrote Erroneous Zones. So I said, "Well, how do I get to the cemetery? Where are you?" He said, "Well, it's not really a cemetery. Your father was an indigent, and this was just a field. But it's located on the grounds of the Candlelight Inn." Honestly. Ooh. I reached into my pocket, and he said, "I'll explain." I said, "Don't bother, I have a map." There was a map on the card. It was about 6 blocks from where I was. Biloxi, now it's got gambling casinos and things there, but at that time it was a very, very small little, just on the Gulf of Mexico. About an hour and a half's drive from New Orleans. So I drove over there, and only thing I really wanted to see, I wanted to see the death certificate. And I wanted to know if he had acknowledged that he had you know, his 3 children were on there. And sure enough, my name was on there, and so was my brother Jim and my brother Dave, 3 sons, which surprised me. And he said, your father's buried right over there, somewhere. He said, there's just a field, and then there's a chain across the driveway. He said, I'm leaving now. He said, but when you leave, and stay as long as you want, he said, just put the chain back up. I don't think he was afraid people were going to get out, but I don't know. Mississippi, the South. So I drove over, got out of the car, walked over to his grave and found it, just a little plate in the ground that said Melvin Lyle Dyer, 1914 to 1964. And I just stood there, and I cursed, and I was angry, and I cried, and I asked questions, and I was there for a couple of hours. And I finally got through with that, whatever it was that I came there to do, and I just felt there was some kind of closure. And it's the only way I was going to meet my father until I leave this body. So I went back to the car, got back in the car, put the chain up, started to back out. I was going to drive to New Orleans, get a flight back to New York for the fall semester. And something told me, you got to go back. And I went back. And I sat there talking to him. And I said, from this moment on, I send you love. Who am I to judge you or anyone? You did what you knew how to do, given the conditions of your life, and who can expect any more from anyone? And that's basically the thought that I have. I was a professor at a university. I was teaching this stuff, you know. I was doing recordings. I had done all those recordings I talked to you about yesterday, and I wanted to write and put them all together, but something was keeping me from doing the writing. I just couldn't write anymore. My writing had stopped. It was just dry inside. I said, I forgive you. I forgive you. And I got back in the car, and it was the most significant signal moment of my life. I drove to New Orleans. I turned in this brand new car. I arrived at Kennedy Airport, picked up my car, drove over to the university. The semester wasn't going to start until the 15th of September, on Monday, or Tuesday, whatever it was, and so I had 2 weeks. And I packed up all my tapes, and all my notes, and all the lectures I had been giving in Port Washington for the previous 2 years, and all the notes that I'd had, and the outlines, and my platform, everything was there. And I went down to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and I rented a car, and I drove to the Spindrift Motel on A1A between Oakland Park and Sunrise, still there. They don't have a plaque there, but it's still there. And I locked myself in that room, and I wrote Your Erroneous Zones in 14 days. Cover to cover, 14 days. And everything after that, and I'll tell you what happened after that. We can talk about that if this morning is fine. Okay.
I'm real comfortable back there.
Are you? Are you getting paid for this, or is this just sort of just looking at my ass for the next week?
No, I'm looking at Kelly, to be
You're like,
honest.
I don't know. So, everything in my life changed after that. I was overweight at that time. I had been drinking. I had been eating very, very badly. I was in a marriage that was falling apart. It was not someone I belonged with. I was sick a lot, unhealthy. I started running. I got out of that relationship. People started showing up in my life that I needed. Everything in my life turned around because Mark Twain said that forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. If you only have love inside, that's all you have to give away, regardless of what comes before you. I think, Dana, for you, that was an incredible lesson as well. And it's probably going to be the thing that will just propel you, you know, out of, not only out of that chair, but out of that paralysis. And just seeing you now, and you hadn't done that forgiveness thing to his mother, which must have been an amazingly emotional moment for you. But you just look so radiant and so happy and so fulfilled and just so joyful and so beautiful. It's just, and that's exactly what happened to me, except for the beauty part. That when we fill ourselves with that and these experiences that come along, and it's so, do you see how it's like all tied in? I mean, I just happened to be walking in the restaurant last night and just sitting over here instead of over there, because if Martha was sitting over there, I wouldn't even be telling the story this morning. I'd have been doing something different. And I wouldn't have reminded myself of the impossible dream that all of you have. That's why you're here. It's a dream that probably everybody else in your life thinks is impossible. Maybe there's people in your life who think, what in the world are you doing spending the kind of money that it took and taking a weekend